Welcome to History's Lullaby, where we listen, we relax, and we drift into dreamland. My name's Henry, and it's a true pleasure to be your guide tonight. Hey guys, tonight we're playing a not-so-fun game called Which Historical Underclass Had It Worse? Spoiler alert, you might want to order a late-night pizza after this, because the menu for our first stop is, let's say, extremely light. So, before you settle in, if this little bedtime ritual speaks to you, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe. Consider it a virtual tip for the storyteller about to walk you through streets where personal space meant something very different. Now, if you'd like, lower the lights just enough to let stories breathe. Maybe grab a blanket too. History can be a bit chilly when you're at the bottom of the social pile. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. You wake up with a jolt. Not from an alarm, but from the kind of hunger that feels like your stomach's trying to eat itself. It's day one of our historical survival challenge, and you're an Indian Dalit in 15th century Agra, before the Taj Mahal, when this was just a dusty settlement on the Yamuna River. The air in your one-room hovel is thick, wood smoke from the tiny fire pit, the musty smell of damp straw, and something sharper, maybe the refuse heap just outside your door. That hunger? It's not the I-skipped lunch kind. This is a persistent, aching throb from surviving on 1400 calories daily. Picture trying to run a marathon on a granola bar and a glass of water, except your marathon is hauling clay pots from the river, cleaning the latrines of higher caste families, and skinning dead animals no one else will touch. Historians debate the exact caloric intake, but here's the harsh truth. Your body is a machine running on fumes, and the fuel gauge has been on empty since yesterday's meagre meal. You swing your legs over the side of your pallet, just a frame of wooden slats covered in straw. A rat scurries from under the bed, and you flinch not because it's scary, but because touching it could make you unclean. In this caste system, uncleanliness isn't about soap, it's a social death sentence. Even the shadow of a higher caste person is considered purer than your physical presence. Dressing is a ritual of restriction. Your tunic is coarse linen, patched with scraps of cloth that were once someone else's rags. No bright colours here, only drab browns and greys, because vivid hues are reserved for Brahmins and Kshatriyas. It's like wearing a sign that says, please ignore or despise me. And forget about footwear, your feet are calloused from years of walking on dirt paths, stones and worse. Stepping outside, the village is stirring. Men from the Vaishya caste walk past, their cotton clothes cleaner, their strides confident. You duck your head so fast it's a reflex, keeping your gaze on the ground. Eye contact? That's asking for trouble. In some villages, Dalits had to carry a broom to sweep their footprints, or a pot around their neck to catch their spit, all to avoid polluting the pure. The rules varied, but the message was constant. You exist to be invisible and useful, but never equal. Time to fetch water. The main well, with its carved stone steps, is guarded by a Brahmin priest. He glares as you approach, so you turn away. Instead, you trudge to the stagnant pond at the village's edge. The water is greenish, flecked with algae, and you can see frogs plopping in. You dip your earthen pot, careful not to let your hands touch the water's surface. Higher castes believe even your shadow can contaminate it. No wonder dysentery is a constant threat. Life expectancy of 30 years starts to make sickening sense. As you lug the heavy pot back, you pass the village temple. Its carved pillars and bright flags seem worlds away. You're forbidden to enter, of course. Even the outer courtyard is off limits. Your religion is practiced in secret. Small shrines in the woods, rituals performed under cover of night. The idea of religious purification to change caste. The textbooks say it's possible, like climbing a mountain in flip-flops. In reality, generations of your family have been Dalits, and your children will likely be too. It's a hereditary trap wrapped in religious dogma. The sun is now high, baking the dirt roads into dust. You feel dizzy from hunger and heat. 1400 calories can't fuel manual labour in this climate. You pause to lean against a mud wall, careful not to touch it with your bare skin. Another taboo. A passing merchant from the Shudra caste spits in your direction, not missing by much. This isn't personal, it's just how things are. You might be thinking, surely medieval Europe was better. Hold that thought. Imagine being a serf tied to a lord's land, but we'll get there soon. For now, focus on surviving the morning. One more trip to the pond, then maybe a handful of millet porridge if you're lucky. Try not to think about the fact that your lucky is someone else's barely enough. As you shuffle toward the next backbreaking task, here's a little historical irony. The word Dalit means oppressed, but in some ancient texts there's a whisper of hope. Rituals, penances, a path to purity. Spoiler, it's about as realistic as finding a gourmet restaurant in this village. But hey, at least the Europeans didn't even pretend mobility was possible. But we'll unpack that in the next chapter. For now, just keep moving. Your stomach's growling isn't getting any quieter. The midday sun in 15th century India is baking your shoulders, but let's hit pause on that hunger pain. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and when you open them, the air smells different. It's damp earth, animal dung, and something faintly like rotting cabbage. Welcome to an afternoon in medieval Europe, where you've traded in your Dalit tunic for a scratchy woolen smock. You're a serf on a lord's manor in 14th century England. Your lunch is waiting by the edge of the field, a wooden bowl of pottage. Think of it as a soupy mix of whatever vegetables didn't rot, maybe a few grains of barley, and water that's been boiled so long it's more paste than liquid. Historians argue about whether serfs actually got 1800 calories a day. Some say it was more, some less. But let's be real, that pottage isn't winning any culinary awards. It's warm, it's filling in a spongy sort of way, and it's about to fuel you through the afternoon's backbreaking labour. You're standing in a vast field divided into strips. The Lord's fields are the ones that look best tended with straight rows and healthy wheat. Yours? Well, you're working on the domain, the Lord's personal land, which you have to cultivate before even thinking about your own tiny plot. That's the deal with serfdom. You're tied to the land, obliged to spend 3 days a week working for the Lord, plus pay him in grain, eggs, or whatever else you can scrounge. It's like a full-time job where your boss takes most of your paycheck before you even see it. You're standing in a vast field divided into strips. The Lord's fields are the ones that look best tended with straight rows and healthy wheat. Yours? Well, you're working on the domain, the Lord's personal land, which you have to cultivate before even thinking about your own tiny plot. That's the deal with serfdom. You're tied to the land, obliged to spend 3 days a week working for the Lord, plus pay him in grain, eggs, or whatever else you can scrounge. It's like a full-time job where your boss takes most of your paycheck before you even see it. But hey, at least you're not forbidden from learning to read, officially. Only about 5% of serfs could actually read, mostly those who worked in the Lord's household or as clerks. You, however, are a field serf. Your education is how to plough straight, how to mend a broken ploughshare, and how to avoid the Lord's bailiff when he's in a bad mood. Literacy wasn't a priority for lords. They wanted obedient workers, not bookworms. Time to get back to work. You grab the wooden handle of the heavy plough, yoke to a pair of oxen that look about as enthusiastic as you feel. The soil is clay and wet from yesterday's rain, making each furrow a struggle. Your hands are calloused, your back aches, and you're already dreading the evening when you'll have to tend to your own strip of land, planting beans or oats, which you'll mostly have to give to the Lord as rent. Time to get back to work. You grab the wooden handle of the heavy plough, yoke to a pair of oxen that look about as enthusiastic as you feel. The soil is clay and wet from yesterday's rain, making each furrow a struggle. Your hands are calloused, your back aches, and you're already dreading the evening when you'll have to tend to your own strip of land, planting beans or oats, which you'll mostly have to give to the Lord as rent. Let's compare this to your morning in India. Yes, you're getting more calories here, maybe 1800 if the harvest is good, but that pottage is mostly carbs and water. Protein is rare, maybe a bit of bacon on feast days, or an egg if your hens are feeling generous. Scurvy isn't unheard of, especially in winter when fresh vegetables are scarce. And while Dalits had to worry about ritual pollution, you have to worry about the Lord's men taking your last sack of grain because he needs to pay for a war. As the afternoon wears on, the sky clouds over. A light rain starts to fall, turning the field into a sea of mud. You slip and fall, landing in a puddle that smells suspiciously like cow manure. Great. Now your only pair of breeches is soaked and filthy. You don't have a change of clothes, of course. Laundry is a luxury when you're working from dawn to dusk. Here's a fun fact. Serfs technically weren't slaves, but they couldn't leave the manor without permission. If you tried to run away, the Lord's men would hunt you down. Your children would be born serfs, your grandchildren too. There's no religious purification here, no theoretical path to a better life. You're stuck, generation after generation in this muddy field, ploughing for a lord who thinks of you as little more than a talking ox. The bell in the village church rings, calling everyone to vespers, You straighten up, aching all over, and glance toward the village. The church is the only stone building besides the castle, a testament to where people's priorities lay. You'll attend Mass on Sundays, of course, praying that God will ease your suffering, though the priest, who's probably a Lord's son, doesn't seem too interested in your daily struggles. As the rain picks up, you finally finish ploughing the domain. Now you have to hurry to your own strip of land before dark. You'll plant some oats, hoping for a good harvest next year, though even if it's bountiful, the Lord will take his share. You think back to the Dalit's 1400 calories and 30-year lifespan. Then look at your own 1800 calories and 35-year horizon. Is 5 extra years worth being a permanent tenant on someone else's land? The sun is setting behind the castle, casting long shadows over the muddy field. You're cold, wet, and still hungry, though the pottage did take the edge off. Tomorrow you'll do it all over again. Plough, plant, pay rent, and wonder if there's a world where people aren't just born into a life of backbreaking labour. For now, though, let's head back to that smoky cottage. Maybe there's a few more spoonfuls of pottage left, or maybe the chickens ate it. Either way, sleep will come easily after a day like this. The first light of dawn is a cruel alarm clock in both worlds. In India, you're waking up to the 1400 calorie reality that's been gnawing at your insides. In Europe, it's the 1800 calorie porridge promise that barely qualifies as a consolation. But let's talk numbers that hit harder than an empty stomach. Life expectancy. 30 years for Dalits, 35 for serfs. That 5-year gap, it's like the difference between watching 1 season of a TV show and 2, except in this case, the show is your entire existence. Let's start with your Indian morning. You're 25, but your body feels twice that age. The skin on your hands is cracked from handling lime for mortar, and you've had a persistent cough since last monsoon. Medical care? Forget it. Higher castes won't let a doctor treat you, and the herbs you can gather from the outskirts are hit or miss. A fever could take you out next week, or a snake bite while you're clearing brush. 30 years isn't a prediction. It's a statistical average that feels more like a deadline. Now teleport to Europe at dawn. You're a serf at 30, ploughing again, except your back pain is worse and you've lost a few teeth to decay. The village healer might give you some willow bark for the pain, but if you get tuberculosis, that's it. The damp climate and smoky huts are perfect breeding grounds for lung diseases. Plus, childbirth is a death sentence for many women. Serf mothers had a mortality rate that makes modern obstetrics shudder. So that extra 5 years, they're 5 more years of backaches, toothaches, and praying you don't catch something the Lord's doctor could cure. Let's unpack why those 5 years exist. Calories matter, sure. 1800 is better than 1400, even if it's mostly gruel. But serfs had something Dalits didn't, a tiny bit of security. The Lord needed you alive to work his fields, so he might allow basic shelter and minimal food during famines. Dalits, on the other hand, were considered disposable. If you died, another Dalit would just take your place cleaning latrines or skinning carcasses. Now onto the literacy chasm. In India, you can't even dream of reading. The Brahmin priests guard scripts like treasure, and teaching a Dalit to write is a crime. Imagine never being able to read a prayer, a story, or even your own name. Your culture is oral, stories passed down by word of mouth, but knowledge is strictly divided by caste. Want to learn math? Forget it. Numbers are for merchants, not for those who handle dead animals. In Europe, the 5% literacy rate is a tease. You're a field serf, so your chances of learning to read are about as high as winning the medieval lottery. But here's the catch. Some serfs did manage it. If you worked in the Lord's manor as a clerk or a servant, you might pick up letters from the priest. There's a slim chance you could read a few verses from the Bible, or even write a letter to a far-off relative. It's not much, but compared to the total illiteracy forced on Dalits, it's a sliver of light. Let's paint a picture. In India, a Brahmin scholar walks past your hovel, clutching a palm leaf manuscript. You catch a glimpse of intricate scripts, but you'll never know what they say. In Europe, the village priest reads from the Bible during Mass, and a few serfs in the front row can follow along, whispering the words under their breath. You're in the back, confused but curious, wondering what secrets are locked in those pages. The literacy difference isn't just about reading books, it's about power. Dalits were kept illiterate to maintain control. If you can't read, you can't challenge the rules. Serfs, while mostly illiterate, at least had a path, however narrow, to basic education. Some even managed to negotiate better terms with lords by writing down agreements. Not that it happened often, but the possibility existed. Here's a dark irony. In India, the caste system used religion to justify illiteracy. Dalits were unclean, so they couldn't touch sacred texts. In Europe, the church controlled literacy, claiming only priests needed to read scripture. Both systems used knowledge as a weapon, but the Indian approach was total denial, while the European was selective permission. Let's talk about daily life impacts. As a Dalit, you can't keep records, so tracking debts or property is impossible. As a serf, even if you can't read, the manor court keeps written records, though they're probably stacked against you. Still, there's a faint hope that someone in your family might become a clerk, maybe even move to a town. For Dalits, that hope doesn't exist. Your children will be Dalits, their children too. The sun is fully up now, and in both worlds, it's time to work. In India, you're heading to the tannery, handling animal hides without gloves. Another reason life expectancy is low. In Europe, you're back to the plough, wondering if that extra 5 years is worth the constant ache in your joints. Historians still argue about these numbers. Was life expectancy really 30 for Dalits? Or is that an underestimate? Did more serfs actually know how to read? The truth is, both lives were brutally short and narrow. But the key difference is visibility. Serfs might see a literate person in their village, while Dalits were surrounded by a wall of ignorance they couldn't climb. As you slave away under the mid-morning sun, think about this. The Dalits' 30 years were a life of enforced invisibility, while the serfs' 35 were a life of visible servitude. Neither is a picnic, but at least serfs could sometimes dream of a different life, even if that dream was as unlikely as a sunny day in February. Tomorrow we'll talk about those dreams, the theoretical path for Dalits, and the hard reality for serfs. For now, just keep moving. Only a few more hours until that 1400, 1800 calorie lunch. The sun is dipping toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. In India, this might be the time for your forbidden prayers. In Europe, the hour when serfs hurry to finish chores before curfew. But let's talk about the glimmer of hope, or the lack thereof, in both worlds. Dalits theoretically could change caste via religious purification, while serfs were stuck faster than a boot in medieval mud. Buckle up, because we're diving into the fantasy versus reality of social mobility. Let's start with the Indian side of the story. You're a Dalit, working as a leather worker, and you've heard whispers about a ritual that could purify your caste. Some ancient texts mention that after years of penance, maybe fasting, maybe bathing in sacred rivers, a person could be reborn into a higher caste. It's like the medieval version of a self-help book, 7 steps to a better reincarnation. Except the steps involve things like walking barefoot to a distant shrine, or surviving a month on only milk and herbs. So you decide to try. You save up what little grain you have, bribe a low-caste guide to show you the way to a remote temple. The journey is grueling. You walk for weeks, sleeping in ditches, avoiding villages where higher castes might attack you for being untouchable. When you finally reach the temple, a Brahmin priest eyes you suspiciously. Purification, he snorts. That's for those who were born impure by accident, not by birth. The reality is harsh. Yes, the texts mention purification, but in practice it's almost impossible. Higher castes don't want Dalits moving up. That would disrupt the entire social order. Imagine trying to get a promotion at a job where your boss believes you're genetically unfit for anything but the worst tasks. The priest might let you perform the ritual, but afterward, you'll still be treated like a Dalit. Your neighbours won't let you use their well. The merchants won't sell you good cloth. It's like changing your Facebook profile picture but keeping the same old life. Let's break down the religious purification myth. First, you need to know about the ritual, which requires access to sacred texts, something Dalits aren't allowed. Second, you need the time and resources to perform it, which is tough when you're working 16 hours a day to survive. Third, even if you do it, the higher castes can just refuse to acknowledge it. It's a rigged game, designed to give a sliver of hope without actually changing anything. Now switch to medieval Europe. You're a serf, sick of ploughing the same field year after year. You've heard stories about free cities where serfs who lived there for a year and a day became free men. Could that be your ticket out? You decide to risk it. One night you pack a small bundle of bread and cheese and slip away from the manor under the cover of darkness. The journey is dangerous. You have to avoid the Lord's patrols, who are trained to catch runaway serfs. The roads are full of bandits and wild animals. After weeks of walking, you reach a town wall It's bustling with merchants, craftsmen, and free people. You feel a surge of hope. Maybe this is possible. But wait, the year and a day rule is real, but it's not as easy as it sounds. First, you have to prove you've been in the city for that long without being caught. The Lord's men might come looking for you, showing your description to the city guard. If they find you, you'll be dragged back to the manor, where the punishment could be whipping, branding, or even having your ears cut off. Second, life in the city isn't a picnic. You'll have to find work as a labourer, living in a crowded tenement with no sanitation. Diseases spread like wildfire, and the mortality rate might be higher than on the manor. You're free, but you're still poor, still struggling to survive. It's like trading a bad boss for no boss, but with more uncertainty. Compare this to the Dalit situation. At least serfs had a tangible, if risky, path to freedom. Dalits had only a theoretical one, wrapped in religious dogma that was almost impossible to fulfill. In Europe, your children could be born free if you made it to the city. In India, your children were Dalits the moment they were born, no matter what rituals you performed. Here's a historical twist. In some parts of India, there was a practice called Jati Parivartan, where a whole community might claim a higher caste after accumulating wealth. But that's for entire jatis, not individuals. As a single Dalit, your chances were zero. In Europe, while individual serfs could escape, it was rare enough to be the stuff of legends. The sun has set now, and in both worlds you're left with a sense of frustration. The Dalit's path is a mirage. The serf's path is a razor's edge. Historians argue about whether these mobility myths were meant to keep people docile, giving them just enough hope to prevent rebellion, but not enough to actually change anything. As you lie down to sleep, tired from another day of backbreaking work, think about this. The Dalit had a dream that was almost impossible. The serf had a reality that was almost impossible. Neither offered a clear way out, but at least the serf could point to a city on the horizon and say, maybe. The Dalit couldn't even dream that big. Tomorrow we'll talk about something more practical. If you could time travel to these eras, how would you survive? Hint, bring a sketchbook and some glass beads, but for now, rest. You've earned it, in whatever world you're in. So, you've survived the grim realities of ancient India and medieval Europe. Now let's talk about cheating the system. If you could time travel with a modern backpack, here's your survival guide. Let's start with a sunrise in 15th century Florence. Because who doesn't want to mix art and espionage? First rule, pack a sketchbook. Not just any sketchbook. Get one with thick, acid-free paper. Why? Because Michelangelo Buonarroti, that moody genius, had a bad habit of tossing unfinished sketches into the studio trash. Imagine sneaking around his workshop at night, digging through piles of discarded paper to find early drafts of the Sistine Chapel figures. Historians say he often reused paper, so those trash sketches might have notes for his next masterpiece. Next item, glass beads. Not the fancy ones, just colourful, mass-produced ones. Head to the Piazza della Signoria, find a Venetian merchant and offer a handful of beads for info. Venice had a monopoly on glass making, so these beads were seen as exotic treasures. A few beads could buy you secrets about the Medici family's next business move, whether they're investing in silk or banking. Just don't mention you got them from a 21st century craft store. Now let's teleport to 16th century London. It's dusk, the Thames is murky, and you're tempted to drink from a well. Stop right there. Remember Dr. John Snow's 1854 cholera map? He proved the Broad Street pump was contaminated, but even before that, Thames water was a death trap. Carry a canteen of boiled water instead, or risk getting the bloody flux, a medieval term for dysentery that lives up to its name. Nighttime in London? Don't leave your lodgings without a sulphur torch. The fog was so thick it could swallow buildings, and robbers lurked in the shadows. Sulphur burns with a bright, smelly flame that scares off both muggers and the occasional stray dog. Bonus tip. If you see a man wearing a top hat and carrying a cane, he might be a link boy. Pay him to guide you, but keep an eye on your purse. Some link boys were in cahoots with thieves. Let's go back to India, 16th century. You're a Dalit, but you've smuggled a bar of soap. Use it sparingly. Soap is a luxury, and washing might make higher castes suspicious. But here's a trick. Mix ash with animal fat to make a primitive soap. It won't win any beauty contests, but it can help fight the infections that shorten Dalit lifespans. Just don't let anyone see you cleaning yourself. They might think you're trying to purify, illegally. In medieval Europe, being a serf sucks, but here's a hack. Learn to read music. Wait, what? Hear me out. Minstrels were sometimes allowed to travel between manors, and if you can play a lute or sing ballads, you might earn extra food or even temporary freedom. Plus, knowing music notes might impress a village priest enough to teach you letters. Remember? 5% literacy rate? This is your way into that elite club. Back to Florence. Want to meet Leonardo da Vinci? Head to the Piazza del Duomo around sunrise. Legend has it he often sketched the cathedral's dome at dawn, muttering to himself about engineering. Bring a notebook and pretend to sketch too. He might strike up a conversation about perspective, and if you're lucky, he'll show you his latest invention. Just don't mention helicopters. London, 17th century. The Great Fire is still a memory, so wooden houses are everywhere. Keep a fire extinguisher in your bag. Okay, fine. Make one from a copper pot filled with sand. Throw sand on small fires before they spread. Also, avoid the Clink prison in Suffolk. It's so notorious, the term "in the clink" comes from it. Even if you're innocent, getting arrested means sharing a cell with rats and diseased prisoners. Here's a universal tip for both India and Europe. Learn basic first aid. Carry aloe vera for burns, crushed garlic for infections. Yes, garlic has antibacterial properties. And willow bark for pain. In India, you can't go to a doctor, so these remedies might save your life. In Europe, the village healer might charge less if you bring your own ingredients. Let's get weird. In Florence, the Medici family loved fireworks. If you can make simple fireworks from saltpeter, sulphur and charcoal, you might get hired for a celebration. Just don't blow up the Palazzo Vecchio. They take that sort of thing seriously. Plus, fireworks were seen as magic, so you could pass as a sorcerer. But maybe don't. The Inquisition is a thing. Last stop. London, 18th century. The Thames is now a sewer, so avoid swimming at all costs. Instead, visit the British Museum when it opens in 1759. Free entry, but dress nicely or they'll turn you away. You can see the Rosetta Stone before it's decoded, and maybe sneak a sketch of the Parthenon marbles. Lord Elgin hasn't stolen them yet, but he will, so hurry. As the moon rises over these historical landscapes, remember, survival isn't just about calories or lifespan. It's about finding the tiny cracks in the system, whether that's a discarded sketch in Florence, a bar of soap in India, or a sulphur torch in London. History is full of rules, but it's also full of people breaking them. Now put away your backpack, blow out the torch, and get some rest. You've earned a good night's sleep, time traveller. Now let's ease into the quiet. The historical adventures fade like shadows on a wall as you sink into your modern bed. No more mud underfoot, no more hunger pangs, just the softness of sheets and the hum of the present. Imagine the stories we told as a river flowing past. Dalit huts and manor cottages, sketchbooks in Florence, torches in London. They're like lullaby notes, each one settling gently into the quiet. You don't need to remember every detail. Let them drift like leaves on water. Your breath slows and the room grows hazy. The challenges we talked about, calories, lifespans, broken dreams, they're now distant echoes. Here, in this moment, you're safe and warm. The past was harsh, but tonight, you're wrapped in peace. Close your eyes. The darkness is a canvas, and the stories we shared are stars lighting your way to sleep. No need to stay awake. The history lesson is done. Now just rest. Softly, gently, let sleep take you. Tomorrow's adventures can wait. For now, drift deep wrapped in the quiet. Good night and sweet dreams. Hey guys, tonight we're teleporting to a place so sticky, so smelly, you might actually miss your modern day shower. Picture this, 15th century India, a port bustling with ships that look one sneeze away from falling apart. Spoiler alert, you might not make it past day 3 here. So, before you settle in, if this little bedtime ritual speaks to you, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe. Now, if you'd like, lower the lights just enough to let stories breathe. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The first thing that hits you isn't the sunrise, but the stench. It's a mix of salt water, rotting fish, and something woody, but in the worst way possible. You step off the creaky gangplank, your sandals sticking to the dock like they're glued to a melted popsicle. The wood beneath you is spongy, full of tiny holes that ooze a slimy brown liquid. Wait, are those holes moving? Yep, that's your first introduction to the real villain here, shipworms. Not the cute, wiggly kind you'd find in a garden, but these are like tiny underwater termites with a grudge against wood. Imagine a clam that decided to become a drill, because that's basically what they are. Their shells are like little saws scraping away at the hulls of ships 24/7. And trust me, they don't take coffee breaks. You lean down to inspect a piece of broken timber. The surface is smooth in some spots, like it's been sanded down by a million tiny teeth. Then you break off a chunk and oh gross, there's a bunch of white, worm-like things squirming inside, each about the length of your pinky. They're covered in a slimy mucus, which is probably their way of saying, welcome to our buffet. Historians call them terredonabalis, but you can just think of them as wood-eating nightmares. Now, let's talk about the ships. They're everywhere, bobbing in the murky water, their masts creaking like old men complaining about the weather. But take a closer look at that merchant vessel over there. See how the wood near the waterline is all pockmarked and soft? That's not from age, that's shipworm damage. And here's the fun fact that'll keep you up at night. These little buggers can chew through a foot of wood in 3 days. THRE days. That's faster than you can binge watch a Netflix series. You might be thinking, why don't they just use better wood? Oh, they tried. Teak, oak, even mahogany, but shipworms don't care about your fancy wood preferences. They're like picky eaters who only order the most expensive dish on the menu. Plus, the warm waters of the Indian Ocean are like a 5-star resort for them. Warmth, moisture, all-you-can-eat wood buffet. What more could a shipworm want? Wait, listen to that commotion over by the customs house. A bunch of sailors are arguing with a port official, waving their hands and pointing at their ship. You can't understand all the words, but the gist is clear. Their ship is leaking and they're blaming the sea devils. But you know better. It's those tiny, squirming shipworms that have turned their hull into Swiss cheese. Let me paint you a bigger picture. It's 1498, around the time Vasco da Gama showed up here, scratching his head at all the ship problems. In his logs, he wrote about how Indian merchants would perform these wild rituals to protect their ships. Spoiler, they didn't involve bug spray, but we'll get to that tomorrow, or maybe even later today if things get interesting. Right now, though, you need to focus on not falling through the dock. The planks are so rotten in places that you can see the water below sloshing around, full of who knows what. Maybe more shipworms, maybe some curious fish, maybe a lost sandal from last week. The point is, this place is a death trap even before you consider the supernatural stuff. Speaking of supernatural, did you notice that statue over there? The one by the main gate, all weathered and covered in offerings. It's a sea god. Or at least that's what the locals tell you. People are placing flowers and little bowls of milk at its feet, muttering prayers for safe voyages. But if you ask me, they should be leaving bowls of shipworm repellent instead. Maybe some copper nails? Wait, no, that's tomorrow's survival tip. Patience, my friend. You take a deep breath, immediately regretting it because of the smell. Time to find some shelter, maybe a tavern or a room above a shop. But as you walk, you can't help but stare at every piece of wood you pass. Is that a shipworm hole? Or just a knot? Your paranoia is kicking in, and honestly, that's a good thing. In this place, being paranoid might just save your life. So here's the deal. It's day 1 morning, and you've already met your arch nemesis, the shipworm. They're tiny, they're hungry, and they're everywhere. The next few days are going to be a battle between you and these little wood-eating machines, not to mention the other fun surprises this port has in store. Like, did I mention the whole sacrificing widows thing? Yeah, that's coming up. But for now, let's just focus on making it to lunch without stepping on a rotten plank and falling into shipworm-infested water. Sound good? Alright, time to wrap up the morning session. You've got a lot to process. Stinky docks, holy wood, angry sailors, and those darn shipworms. Keep your wits about you. Stay away from suspiciously soft wood, and maybe start brainstorming ways to outsmart these little buggers. Tomorrow, we'll see how the locals try to deal with them. Spoiler alert, it involves more drama than a daytime soap opera. The sun's climbed high enough to bake the dock's stench into a solid, eye-watering cloud. You're wiping sweat off your forehead when a drumbeat starts up, slow, thudding like someone's knocking on death's door. Follow the sound to the far end of the port, where a crowd's forming around a sleek-looking ship. Its hull's still mostly intact, but you notice the crew nervously tapping on the wood, like they're checking for a pulse. Here comes the main event. A group of men in saffron-coloured robes leads out a woman in ragged red cloth. Her hair's loose, tangled, and she's barefoot on the splintery dock. Wait, those men are gripping her arms a little too tight, and she's not walking, she's being dragged. That's no willing participant. The crowd parts, muttering prayers, and you catch words like, now Devta, ship god maybe. Now watch closely. They're tying her to the ship's prow, right where the figurehead should be. Ropes dig into her wrists as she struggles, but her protests are drowned out by the drummers. One of the priests holds up a coconut, cracks it open over the deck, and the white flesh spills onto the wood. Is that supposed to be a peace offering? To who? The shipworms or the sharks? It's a protection ritual, a man beside you whispers, adjusting his turban. The widow's soul will guide the ship, keep the sea devils away. He says it so matter-of-factly, like he's talking about the weather. But you're staring at the woman's trembling knees, at the way her eyes are fixed on the water. Not the sky, not the priests, but the dark, murky water below. Let's break this down. Vasco da Gama mentioned these living sacrifices in his logs. 1498, he wrote about Indian sailors tying widows to bows before storms, claiming it kept ships safe. But here's the kicker. He also noted that most of those ships still ended up leaking. So maybe the ship god has a bad memory, or the widows have union issues. Your guess is as good as mine. The priests are chanting now, waving incense that does nothing to mask the fishy stink. Some people throw flowers at the ship, but most keep their distance, like they're afraid the bad luck might rub off. The woman stopped struggling, just hanging there, her red dress flapping in the breeze. You half expect her to start singing a sad ballad, but instead there's just the sound of waves lapping against the hull, and maybe, if you listen close, the tiny scrape of shipworms at work. Wait, look at the captain. He's pacing on the deck, clutching a carved wooden amulet. Every few steps he glares at the widow, then at the water, like he's blaming both for the inevitable. Historians argue about whether these sacrifices were common or just a desperate last resort. Some say it was a way to dispose of widows, who were seen as bad omens. Others claim it was genuine belief. Me? I think it's a mix of fear and tradition, with a dash of, we've tried everything else, why not? Here's a fun, terrible fact, sharks love these waters. The port's basically a buffet for them, what with all the fish guts and, well, maybe the occasional sacrificial offering. So when they tie this woman to the bow, they're not just praying to the gods, they're also sending a come and get it signal to any nearby sharks. Talk about multitasking. The ritual ends as abruptly as it started. The priests pack up their drums, the crowd disperses, and the crew starts untying the ropes. The woman stumbles off the ship, her arms red from the bindings, and is led away without a word. No one checks if she's okay, no one offers water. She's just a tool, a good luck charm that's being used and discarded. You follow her with your eyes until she disappears into a warren of shacks. Meanwhile, the ship's crew is preparing to set sail. They're shouting orders, untying ropes, but every now and then someone will knock on the mast or spit over the side. More superstitions, like adding extra sprinkles to a very cursed cake. Let's connect the dots. Why widows? In some ancient Indian cultures, widows were considered inauspicious, like they carried the stench of death. So what better way to appease the sea god than to offer up someone already touched by death? It's twisted logic, the kind that makes sense only in a world where shipworms are seen as divine punishment rather than tiny marine bivalves. You're still standing there processing this messed up ritual when your stomach growls. Time for lunch maybe? But the thought of eating after watching that makes you queasy. Instead, you head towards a nearby stall selling something that looks like flatbread. The vendor smiles, showing stained teeth, and you wonder if he's ever witnessed a sacrifice before. Probably, given how nonchalant he is about the whole thing. As you bite into the bread, surprisingly good actually, you glance back at the ship that just performed the ritual. It's pulling away from the dock, its sails catching the wind. Will the sacrifice work? Judging by the history books, probably not, but the crew seems hopeful, or maybe just desperate. Either way, they've got bigger problems than angry sea gods. Those shipworms are clocking in for their afternoon shift, and they don't take lunch breaks. So that's noon on day one, a front row seat to a ritual that's equal parts tragic and baffling. You've seen how fear and superstition can lead people to do messed up things, all in the name of survival. But here's the thing, in a place where reality is already trying to kill you, hello shipworms, it's easy to grasp at any straw, even if that straw is a terrified widow tied to a ship's bow. Up next, afternoon panic. That ship over there? The one that's listing a little too much to the starboard side? Yeah, we'll be checking that out soon. But for now, maybe find a shady spot, try to forget what you just saw, and prepare for the next round of how to not die in 15th century India. Spoiler, it doesn't involve sacrificing widows. The afternoon sun turns the port into a frying pan, and you're hiding in the shade of a warehouse when chaos erupts. Over by the north dock, A merchant ship is listing hard to starboard, its hull burping bubbles like a dying fish. Crewmen are scrambling on deck, buckets flying, but the water's rising faster than their panic, which is saying something because these guys look like they've seen a ghost or a shipworm colony. It's the sea snakes. A man screams, dropping his bucket to clutch a wooden amulet. They're chewing through the hole from below. Another sailor points at the water, where ripples pulse around the ship, but you know better. Those aren't snake tails, that's just shipworms doing their daily workout, turning the hull into a sponge. Still, try telling that to a guy who's knee-deep in seawater and convinced he's about to be eaten by mythical reptiles. Let's set the scene. It's day 2, around 5009. Yep, a few years after Dagama's visit. That Arabic navigation log I mentioned? It actually records this exact scenario. A ship called the Al Mamun sprang a leak near these very docks, and 20 out of 27 crewmen refused to abandon ship. Why? Because they believed the waters were infested with sea serpents that drag men under. Spoiler, the only things dragging them under were the shipworms and good old-fashioned gravity. You edge closer, careful not to step on a rotten plank. The ship's captain is shouting orders, but his voice is shaky. Bail. For the love of Allah, bail. He roars, but half the crew is huddled in the rigging, praying. The other half are trying to plug the leaks with rags and tree sap, which works about as well as using chewing gum to fix a dam. The water's up to their waists now, and you can hear the wood creaking ominously, like the ship's begging for mercy. Here's the messed up part. They're more afraid of the myths than the reality. See that sailor over there, the one wearing a necklace of shark teeth? He keeps glaring at the water, convinced a sea snake will leap out and bite his head off. Meanwhile, the real threat is invisible, tiny, white, and busy turning his workplace into kindling. It's like being afraid of a spider while standing on a collapsing bridge. Priorities, people, wait. Listen to the argument between two crewmen. I saw one last month. The younger one insists, his face pale. A serpent as thick as my arm, with scales that glowed in the dark. The older sailor rolls his eyes but doesn't contradict him. Why? Because in a world without Google, stories are facts until proven otherwise. Plus, fear is contagious, especially when you're ankle deep in freezing water and your escape plan involves jumping into said water. Let's talk about those sea snakes. Were they real? Maybe some species of eel or giant fish, but probably just exaggerated tales. Sailors have always been prone to spinning yarns, especially after a few too many cups of arak, that's a local spirit, by the way, tastes like paint, thinner mixed with regret. But when you're stuck on a sinking ship, a tall tale becomes a life or death belief. The water's reached the deck now, washing over ropes and empty food barrels. The captain is the first to jump, splashing into the water with a yelp. He starts swimming furiously towards the dock, looking over his shoulder like he expects a sea monster to chase him. But the remaining crew? They stay put, clinging to the masts, shouting that the captain's doomed to be snake food. Remember that Arabic log? It says the Al Mamun sank within an hour, taking those 20 crewmen with it. No sea snakes were spotted, just a bunch of floating bodies and a lot of very full shipworms. It's a harsh reminder. In a crisis, ignorance can be deadlier than the problem itself. These guys weren't killed by monsters, they were killed by their own beliefs. You watch as the ship in front of you lists even more, its mast almost touching the water. The crewmen who stayed are now standing on the keel, knees shaking, still convinced that jumping is suicide. One guy is crying, reciting prayers, while another is trying to tie himself to the mast with a rope. It's a sad, stupid spectacle, and you can't help but feel a little mad. At them, at the shipworms, at the whole messed up situation. Here's a thought. Maybe the real sea monster isn't a snake, but superstition itself. It wraps around your brain, makes you believe things that aren't true, and stops you from doing the logical thing, like, say, abandoning a sinking ship. The shipworms are just doing their thing, being nature. The real problem is when humans let fear override common sense. The ship gives a final groan and starts to sink. The crewmen let out a collective scream, but it's cut short as the water swallows them. No dramatic sea snake attack, no epic battle, just silence, followed by a few bubbles. The captain, who made it to shore, is lying on the dock, panting, staring at the spot where his ship used to be. He looks shell-shocked, maybe even guilty. The crowd that gathered to watch is murmuring now, exchanging looks. Some make the sign of the cross, or whatever equivalent they have. Others spit into the water. A few brave souls row out in small boats to see if anyone survived, but you know it's pointless. Those 20 crewmen are gone. victims of a myth that was more powerful than reality. So that's afternoon on day 2, a front row seat to a preventable tragedy. You've seen how fear can blind people, how stories can become deadly beliefs, and how shipworms don't care about your superstitions, they just want to eat wood. It's a lot to take in, especially when you remember that you're still in this god-forsaken port, surrounded by rotting ships and paranoid sailors. But don't worry, there's hope. Up next, evening survival tips. I'm about to drop some knowledge that would have saved those crewmen's lives and maybe impressed a few blacksmiths. Hint, it involves a metal that shipworms hate. So stick around, maybe grab a cup of something warm, but not from the harbour, trust me, and get ready to learn how to outsmart these little wood-eating jerks. The sun's dipping below the horizon, painting the port in hues of orange and purple. Pretty, but don't be fooled. Nightfall here means cooler temperatures, yes, but also more shipworms at work. They're like little nocturnal wood chompers, and after watching that ship sink this afternoon, you're not taking any chances. Time for that survival hack I promised, how to make your ship unappetizing to these tiny terrorists. First, find the blacksmith. He's easy to spot, just follow the sound of clanging metal and the smell of burning coal. You'll find him in a soot-covered workshop, hammer in hand, shaping a horseshoe. His arms are thick as tree trunks, and he's got this sceptical look when you walk in, like he's used to sailors bringing crazy requests. Which, to be fair, you are about to do. I need copper sheets, you say, trying to sound confident. Enough to cover the hull below the waterline. The blacksmith raises an eyebrow, his hammer pausing mid-air. Copper? That's expensive, friend. What's wrong with good old tar and rope? He gestures to a pile of sticky black tar buckets in the corner. Here's the pitch, shipworms. They hate copper. See? Their little shells are like saws, right? Well, copper's too hard for them to gnaw through. It's like trying to eat a brick with your teeth. You're making this up as you go, but hey, it's based on real science. Turns out, shipworms secrete enzymes to break down wood, but copper messes with their digestive system. Modern ships use copper coatings for exactly this reason. The blacksmith scratches his beard, eyeing you like you're selling snake oil. Copper repels shipworms? I've never heard that. He goes back to hammering the horseshoe, sparks flying. Besides, where am I going to get that much copper? This ain't Venice, you know. Time for plan B, bribery. You reach into your pocket and pull out a handful of glass beads, the kind Venetian traders consider priceless here. I'll trade these for the copper. Look, they're from across the sea, made by master craftsmen. You hold them up to the dim light where they catch the glow like tiny rainbows. The blacksmith's eyes widen. Glass beads are a big deal in 15th century India, especially intricate ones. He sets down his hammer and takes a bead between his calloused fingers, rolling it around. Maybe we can work something out. How much copper do you need? Now, let's get technical. You need sheets about as thick as a coin, cut to fit the hull's curves. The blacksmith will have to melt down old copper pots, maybe some scrap jewellery, to get enough material. It's a tedious process, but worth it. While he works, you can explain the science, well, your simplified version. Think of copper as a force field. The shipworms touch it, go, nope, too tough, and swim away to find easier wood. As the blacksmith starts melting copper in his forge, the workshop fills with a strange metallic smell. You watch as the red-hot metal liquefies, wondering if this is actually going to work. Historians say that by the 16th century, some European ships did use copper sheathing to fight shipworms, but it was expensive. Here, you're basically introducing a future technology, which is pretty cool, if it works. While waiting, let's talk about why shipworms hate copper. Their bodies are sensitive to certain metals, and copper is toxic to their tiny systems. When they try to burrow into copper-plated wood, they either give up or die. It's like putting hot sauce on your salad to keep away ants, except way more effective. The blacksmith is now pounding the molten copper into sheets, his hammer echoing through the workshop. He's muttering to himself, probably calculating how much your glass beads are worth. You know, he says between swings, I had a cousin whose ship sank because of those little worms. Maybe he should have tried this copper trick. Ah, perfect opening. Exactly. And think of all the widows they won't need to sacrifice if ships don't sink. You immediately regret saying that. The blacksmith gives you a weird look. Anyway, how much longer? Finally, the copper sheets are ready. They're rough around the edges, but functional. Now comes the hard part, attaching them to the ship. You'll need nails, also made of copper if possible, to avoid rust. The blacksmith sells you a pouch of copper nails because your glass beads were apparently very convincing. Out on the dock, you recruit a few skeptical sailors to help. They keep looking at the copper sheets like they're magic, but when you mention the ship that sank today because of shipworms, they get to work. You direct them to cover every inch below the waterline, hammering the sheets into place with loud thuds. As you work, the moon rises, casting a silver glow over the port. The sound of hammers fills the air, mixed with the occasional splash of water. Some sailors pass by, laughing at your fancy metal boat, but you ignore them. Let them laugh. Tomorrow, when their ships are leaking, you'll be sailing smoothly. Here's a pro tip. Make sure the copper sheets overlap slightly, like roof tiles. That way, there are no gaps for shipworms to squeeze through. Also, check for any exposed wood. Even a tiny sliver can be a gateway for these little buggers. It's like sealing a house against termites, but underwater. The blacksmith stops by to inspect your handiwork. He nods approvingly, which is a big deal coming from a grumpy guy. Not bad, stranger. Maybe you should open a shop here, selling copper armour for ships. You laugh, but secretly think he might be onto something. By midnight, the job is done. Your ship looks a bit odd with its copper underbelly, but it's secure. You pay the sailors with some more glass beads, and they wander off, still muttering about crazy foreigners and their metal boats. As you lean against the hull, running your hand over the cool copper, you feel a sense of relief. For the first time since arriving, you're not worried about waking up in a sinking ship. The shipworms can chew on someone else's wood tonight. So that's evening on day 2. You've outsmarted the shipworms with a little science and a lot of bribing. You learn that copper is a shipworm's worst enemy, that blacksmiths can be convinced with shiny beads, and that sometimes the craziest ideas are the most effective. Now, get some sleep. Tomorrow's dawn might bring more trouble, but at least your ship is prepared. Just don't forget to set an alarm. You wouldn't want to miss the sunrise, or whatever drama the day has in store. Dawn cracks the sky like an egg, spilling pale light over the port. You're jolted awake by the sound of splintering wood, not from your ship, thank God, but from the vessel next door. Its hull, unprotected by copper, looks like it's being chewed by a giant beaver. Water gushes in, carrying chunks of rotten wood and, yep, those squirming shipworms like tiny white flags of surrender. Roll out of your hammock, which, by the way, is way more comfortable than sleeping on a rotting dock, and check your own ship. The copper sheets glint in the dawn light, still firmly attached. You run a hand along the waterline. No soft spots, no oozing slime. The shipworms must have tried to burrow in last night, realised it was like biting a rock, and moved on to easier meals. Score 1 for science. Now, look around. The port's a mess. 3 other ships are listing or sunk, their masts sticking out of the water like gravestones. Sailors are shouting, diving into the water to salvage what they can, but most are just staring in horror at the damage. Remember that ship from yesterday, the one that did the widow sacrifice? It's halfway to the bottom, its deck awash. So much for divine protection, huh? It's the curse. A man wails, falling to his knees on the dock. We didn't sacrifice enough widows. Another sailor spits on the ground. No, it's those sea snakes. They ate the hull from below. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. After last night's copper project, you know better. This isn't curses or monsters, it's biology. Shipworms just did what shipworms do. Eat wood, reproduce, repeat. Let's revisit that Arabic navigation log from 59. It says the Al-Mamun sank at dawn, just like these ships. The crew's fear of sea snakes kept them from jumping overboard, even as the ship filled with water. Today you're seeing the same scenario play out, minus the sea snake part, but not entirely. Over by the sunken ship, a group of sailors is arguing. "I'm not getting in that water," one man shouts, pointing at the ripples. "The snakes will get me." His friends try to pull him towards a lifeboat, but he's rooted to the spot, shaking like a leaf. It's déjà vu from yesterday afternoon, except now it's dawn, and the stakes are higher. Here's the harsh reality. Those 20 crewmen from the log, they died because they believed a story instead of trusting their eyes. The water wasn't full of sea snakes, it was full of, well, water. And maybe a few curious fish, but definitely no monsters. Their fear was a deadlier predator than any shipworm. You walk over to the panicking sailor, trying to be helpful. Look, there are no sea snakes, just shipworms, and they're too busy eating that ship to bother you. It gives you a wild look, like you're speaking gibberish. "You're crazy. The sea devils will drag me under." He goes back to praying, clutching his amulet. Sigh. Some people just can't be reasoned with. You turn away, focusing on your own ship. The copper sheets are doing their job, and you feel a sense of accomplishment. You introduced a simple solution to a centuries-old problem, all with some glass beads and a persuasive argument. Take that, shipworms. Now, let's talk about why this matters. In the 15th century, people didn't understand biology or chemistry. They saw a problem, ships sinking, and invented supernatural explanations because the real one was too small to see. It's easy to laugh at them now, but remember, we still do this today, just with different problems. A commotion draws your attention to the main dock. The port authorities are inspecting the sunken ships, shaking their heads. One official kicks a chunk of rotten wood, and shipworms fall out, wriggling. "This is the third ship this month," he mutters to his assistant. "We need to do something about these things." You pipe up, copper sheets. "They repel shipworms. I can show you." The official gives you a skeptical look, but after seeing your intact hull, he listens. You explain the science again, simplified of course, and he nods slowly. Copper is expensive, but maybe for the trading ships. Maybe you're starting a revolution here. Instead of sacrificing widows or praying to sea gods, people could use actual protection. Imagine the lives that could be saved, the ships that could stay afloat. It's a nice thought, even if it'll probably take decades for the idea to catch on. As the sun rises higher, the port starts to bustle again, despite the wreckage. Sailors are already repairing what's left, others are loading new ships. The man who refused to get in the water, he's still there, but his ship is now completely submerged. He looks shell-shocked, maybe finally realizing there were no sea snakes. Too little, too late. So this is day 3, dawn, the moment of truth. Your ship survived, thanks to a little modern knowledge. The others? Well, they're reminders of what happens when superstition trumps science. You made it past the 3-day mark, which is more than most can say around here. Before we wrap up, here's a final thought. Fear is a powerful thing, but so is curiosity. If those sailors had bothered to look closer at the shipworms instead of inventing sea snakes, maybe they'd still be alive. Sometimes, the scariest monsters are the ones we make up in our heads. Alright, time to say goodbye for now. You've survived 3 days in a port where shipworms and superstition rule. Keep that copper on your ship, stay curious, and maybe next time you can convince more people to skip the sacrifices and go for science instead. The port fades behind you as your copper-clad ship glides into open water. The morning breeze carries the last traces of fishy stench, replaced by the clean saltiness of the Indian Ocean. You lean on the railing, watching the shore shrink to a smudge. A place where shipworms gnawed at wood and fear gnawed at mines, where widows were tied to bows and sailors chose drowning over swimming. Let's piece it all together. 3 days, day 1, meeting your tiny arch-nemesis in rotting docks, day 2, witnessing a tragic ritual and a preventable sinking, day 3, proving science works while others clung to myths. That Arabic log was right. Fear kills faster than reality. But you brought a little future to the past, one copper sheet at a time. Historians will tell you that shipworms plagued sailors for millennia. Ancient Egyptians coated hulls in tar. Romans tried lead sheeting, but it wasn't until the 1700s that copper became standard. You, my friend, are ahead of the curve. Imagine if Da Gama had known about this trick. Maybe those widow sacrifices would have seemed as ridiculous to him as they do to us now. Look back at the port one last time. The sun glints off your ship's copper, a tiny rebellion against ignorance. Though still, there are probably arguing over whether your magic metal is a gift from the gods or a deal with the devil. Spoiler, it's just chemistry, but try telling that to a guy wearing a shark-tooth necklace. Here's a fun fact to tuck away. Shipworms aren't even worms. They're bivalves like clams, but with a serious identity crisis. Their shells evolved into drill bits, their bodies into slimy tunnels. Nature's pretty wild, huh? Way wilder than any sea snake story. As the horizon stretches before you, think about the bigger picture. This isn't just a story about bugs and boats. It's about how humans react when faced with the unknown. We invent myths, we follow traditions, we sometimes do messed up things. But every now and then, someone looks closer, asks questions, and finds a better way. That someone was you this time around. The crew is singing a shanty now, a lively tune about escaping wood-eating demons. They've forgotten their superstitions, at least for today, too busy celebrating their intact hull. You smile, knowing you played a part in that. Maybe you'll write about this in your own log, so future historians can read about the stranger who showed up with glass beads and copper, changing a few lives in a forgotten port. So ends our little adventure. You survived 3 days in a place where nature and nurture teamed up to kill you. You outsmarted shipworms, witnessed human folly, and maybe even planted a seed of reason. Not bad for a quick trip to the 15th century. Now, close your eyes for a second. Imagine the gentle rocking of the ship, the lap of waves against the copper hull. No more stench, no more panic, just the rhythm of the ocean. The past is drifting away, like those shipworm holes washing out to sea. Before we part, here's a thought to carry into dreamland. History is full of tiny terrors and big beliefs, but sometimes the simplest solutions are the most revolutionary. You proved that one copper sheet and glass bead at a time. Not bad for a bedtime story, huh? Now let the story fade like the port behind your ship. Feel the warmth of the imaginary sun on your skin, the coolness of the copper railing under your hand. The cruise shanty becomes a distant hum, blending with the soft shoosh of waves. Imagine those shipworms now, tiny and harmless in their natural habitat, no longer the monsters of your first day. The widow's red dress flutters in a memory, gentle as a breeze, no longer a symbol of fear. The past is a river, and you're floating on it, carried by the current of time. Your breath slows, matching the rhythm of the ocean. The copper sheets glow softly in your mind's eye, a shield against both history's dangers and today's worries. There's no need to fight or flee now, just drift, like your ship on the quiet sea. The darkness behind your eyelids is warm and safe, like the inside of a well-built hull. No more deadlines, no more sinking ships, just the lullaby of history wrapping around you. Sleep comes easily here, where stories end and dreams begin. So rest now, traveller. You've earned it. The port's troubles are far away, and the only thing gnawing at you is the urge to sleep. Sweet dreams, and may your mental ships always be copper-clad. Hey guys, tonight we're teleporting to a 19th century Bengali village, but fair warning, you might need more than a travel guide here. In fact, odds are you won't make it past the first monsoon season. Before we unpack that cheery thought, let's set the scene. Imagine stepping off a rickety bullock cart onto mud so thick it sucks at your sandals. The air smells like wet hay and something unwashed. Birds chirp, but their songs sound muted, like the village itself is holding its breath. So, before you settle in, if this little bedtime ritual speaks to you, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps keep the history lullabies coming. Now, if you'd like, lower the lights just enough to let stories breathe. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The moment your feet hit the ground, you notice something off. The huts here are made of wattle and daub, their thatched roofs sagging, but it's not the architecture that chills you. It's the eyes. Dozens of eyes peeking from doorways, from behind palm trees, from the shadows of a crumbling temple. The people here, men mostly, stare without blinking, their expressions a mix of curiosity and pity? No, maybe something harder, like resignation. You brush off the awkwardness, figuring it's just a foreign land. You try to smile at an old man sitting on a stoop, but he spits Beetlejuice onto the dirt and looks away. Okay then, maybe they're not big on tourists. You spot a group of women gathered by a well, but they fall silent as you approach. Their saris are dull, faded, no bright reds or oranges. All in earth tones, like the mud. Wait, is that ash in their hair? A young boy, no more than 10, tugs at your sleeve. You new here? He whispers, his voice hoarse. Before you can answer, a woman, probably his mother, rushes over and yanks him back. Don't talk to strangers, she hisses, but her eyes are on your clothes, your clean boots. Especially not ones who look like they can leave. Leave? Why would you want to leave? It's just a quiet village, right? But as the afternoon wears on, the quiet starts to feel heavy. There's no laughter, no shouting kids, no women gossiping, just a low hum of activity, men tending to fields, women grinding grain, but all of it done in silence, like a play where everyone forgot their lines. You wander toward the edge of the village where the huts thin out and give way to jungle. There's a clearing here ringed by stones. The ground is blackened, like a fire was recently put out. Odd. Why would they build a fire pit so far from the village? You bend down to touch the ash, and your fingers come away sticky. Wait, is that resin? And something else. A faint chemical smell. Like opium? A shadow falls over you. You turn to see an old woman standing there, her face wrinkled like a dried fig. She's wearing the same dull sari, her hair matted with ash. You shouldn't be here, she says, her voice a rasp. This is where we say goodbye. Goodbye? To whom? Then it hits you. The ash in the women's hair, the blackened clearing, the silence. This is a widow village, the place where women whose husbands have died are sent. But why the silence? Why the fear? You remember something from a history book, sati, the practice of widows burning themselves on their husband's pyre. But that was voluntary, right? The old woman cackles as if reading your mind. Voluntary. She spits the word like it's poison. Like how the monsoon is voluntary, comes every year, whether you want it or not. She points to the blackened ground. Last month Parvati went up, said she was eager to join her husband in heaven. The old woman rolls her eyes. Eager, my foot. Her sons poured opium down her throat before sunrise. She was so drowsy she could barely stand. Your stomach turns. That can't be true. The history book said most were voluntary, but the old woman's eyes are steady, unblinking. They say it's an honour, a way to cleanse the family's shame. But look around, stranger. Do these women look honoured? Do they look like they chose this life? You look around. The women you saw earlier are now sitting in a circle, weaving baskets. Their movements are mechanical, their faces blank. No one talks, no one smiles. It's like a graveyard with people still breathing. The old woman taps your arm. Best leave before nightfall. Things get messy after dark. Messy? What does that mean? But she's already shuffling away, back toward the village. You stand there looking at the blackened clearing, at the silent women, at the men who still stare from a distance. This isn't just a village. It's a prison. And, from the look of things, getting out alive might be harder than getting in. As the sun dips below the palm trees, the village transforms. Men who'd been staring all day now move with purpose, carrying oil lamps that cast jagged shadows on mud walls. Women hurry to shutter their huts, fastening bamboo latches with trembling hands. You'd thought the silence was heavy before. Now it's suffocating, like a wet blanket thrown over the entire settlement. You find a dilapidated shed on the village's fringe, its thatch roof full of holes. It's better than nothing. As you settle onto a pile of musty straw, something crunches under your elbow. You reach into the hay and pull out a broken clay pipe. The bowl is caked with a brown, sticky residue opium, maybe? The old woman's words echo. They poured opium down her throat. Night falls like a curtain. Crickets chirp in the distance, but inside the village, even the dogs have stopped barking. You lie on your back, staring at the stars through a roof hole, when a low murmur drifts from the nearest huts. It's not conversation, it's more like a chant, low and rhythmic, punctuated by the occasional clink of metal. You creep to the shed door and peer out. 3 men are moving between huts, each carrying a leather pouch and a long, thin pipe. Their movements are furtive, like burglars, but no one calls out. When they pause at a widow's hut, one of them knocks softly. A moment later, a woman's voice answers, hoarse and reluctant. The man enters, closing the door behind him. 5 minutes pass. 10. The hut remains dark, but the murmur has stopped. Then, a sound makes your blood freeze, a soft, rhythmic sloshing, like liquid being poured, followed by a woman's whimper, quickly cut off. The man emerges from the hut, shaking the last drops from a clay bottle. He stuffs it into his pouch and moves to the next door. Your heart pounds in your ears. That must be the opium. They're drugging the widows. But why? The history book said sati was a choice, so why drug someone who's chosen to die? You remember the statistics. 40% of voluntary sati victims were drugged. So this isn't rare, it's routine. A breeze picks up, carrying the sweet, sickly smell of opium smoke. It mingles with the stench of unwashed bodies and damp earth, creating a nauseating cocktail. You clamp a hand over your mouth, afraid the smell will knock you out too. How many widows are being drugged tonight? How many don't want to go to that blackened clearing? The men finish their rounds and disappear into a larger hut at the village centre. The oil lamp inside flicks on, casting silhouettes on the walls. You see them pass around a bottle, hear their low laughter. Meanwhile, the huts around them lie silent, as if everyone inside has been switched off. Then, from the far end of the village, a scream rips through the night. It's not a sleepy moan. It's pure terror, the kind that comes from someone who's just realised they're trapped. The scream cuts off abruptly, followed by a thump, then silence. You wait, frozen, for another sound. But there's nothing. The crickets have stopped chirping. The wind has died. It's as if the entire village is holding its breath, waiting for dawn to come and sweep the night's horrors under the mud. You curl up tighter in the straw, trying to ignore the sticky residue on the broken pipe beside you. So this is what the old woman meant by messy. This is how they ensure voluntary sacrifice. By drugging, by silencing, by breaking wills before the pyre even burns. As you listen to The Empty Night, you realise something worse than not surviving a year. Surviving a night here might mean waking up to a fate you can't escape. Try to take a deep breath, but the air still smells of opium and fear. Maybe count the stars through the roof hole? Or imagine the sunrise chasing away these shadows. Either way, keep your eyes open tonight. Sleep might be the most dangerous thing of all. Alright, listen up. If you want to make it past day 2 in this widow village, you need a game plan. Forget what the history books say about honour or choice. This is survival mode, and we're playing by jungle rules. Let's break down the do's and don'ts before the sun comes up, and those opium pushers start making their rounds again. First rule, never accept a clay pot from anyone. Seriously, no matter how friendly they seem. That old man who spat Beetlejuice yesterday. If he offers you a welcome drink, smile and say you're allergic to whatever grows here. Milk, rice, wine. Blame it on a weak stomach. Most of those pots are laced with opium or a sedative made from datura flowers. Remember, 40% of voluntary sacrifices started with a drugged drink. You don't want to be part of that statistic. Second move, stake out the village edge before dawn. Find a spot near the jungle, maybe behind that big mango tree you saw. Why? Because when the sun rises, they'll start rounding up widows for, well, let's call it morning chores. If you're hiding in plain sight, pretending to pick berries or tie your sandal, they might overlook you. Pro tip, carry a few pebbles to throw into the bushes. Make them think there's a wild animal around, so they stay away. Third trick, pretend you're deathly ill, not just a cough, go full on. I ate bad fish and now my insides are trying to escape. Mow in a little, clutch your stomach, walk with a limp. Widows here are supposed to be weak and submissive, so acting sick fits the role. Bonus, if they think you're too gross to touch, they might not force you into any rituals. Just don't overdo it. If they think you're dying, they might speed up the process. Now, here's a sneaky tip they didn't teach in history class: trade trinkets for info. If you brought anything from the future, maybe a shiny button, a piece of coloured glass, slip it to that young boy who tugged your sleeve yesterday. Kids are always curious, and he might know which huts have secret exits or where the men hide the opium. Just make sure no one sees you. Trading with strangers is probably against village rules, whatever those are. Also, avoid the temple at all costs. That crumbling structure near the centre, it's not a place of worship. It's where they prepare the pyres. I saw men carrying bundles of dry wood and jars of ghee, clarified butter, in there last night. The smoke from a ghee-soaked fire is thick and suffocating. Remember, 80% of widows in Bengal died from smoke inhalation, not burns. Stay as far from that place as possible. Let's talk about clothing. Ditch anything bright. Your modern t-shirt might look cool, but in this village, only widows wear dull colours. Find some old rags, roll in the mud, make yourself blend in. If you could steal a plain sari or dhoti from a clothesline, do it. The more you look like one of them, the less likely you are to be noticed. Here's a dark but necessary tip. Learn to recognise the signs of a drugged widow. If you see a woman walking unsteadily, her eyes glassy, her head lolling, get away from her. That's when the men with bamboo poles come around. They're not there to help, they're there to encourage her onto the pyre. The statistics said they'd poke her with those poles if she tried to crawl out. Yeah, not a sight you want to witness. Finally, trust no one. Not the old woman who warned you, not the boy, not even that cow that's been staring at you. In this village, kindness is a luxury no one can afford. If someone offers to help you, they're probably fishing for information or setting a trap. Keep your story straight. Say you're a distant relative, a traveller lost in the monsoon, anything but the truth. Alright, let's recap. Avoid drinks, hide at dawn, fake sickness, trade small items, stay away from the temple, dress drably, watch for drugged widows, and trust no one. It's like a survival guide for a bad horror movie, but this is real. The key is to blend in without being noticed, to be a ghost in this village of ghosts. The first rooster just crowed, time to move. Stuff that broke an opium pipe in your bag, maybe it'll be evidence later. Brush the straw off your clothes and get into position. Remember, every hour you stay awake and alert is an hour you're not on that pyre. Now take a deep breath, hold your nerve, and let's see if we can make it to sunrise without getting caught. The first rays of sun bleed through the jungle canopy, turning the village's mud huts into honey-coloured silhouettes. But there's no peace in this dawn. Instead, a low hum of activity crackles in the air, like electricity before a storm. You're hiding behind that mango tree, as per yesterday's plan, when you see them. the men with bamboo poles moving from hut to hut like human scarecrows. They bang on doors with the blunt ends of their poles. "Wake up, sister," one calls, his voice too cheerful for the hour. The gods wait. From inside, you hear shuffling. Then a woman emerges, her head bowed, her steps unsteady. Her eyes are half closed, like she's still dreaming, and her hands fumble at the edges of her faded sari. Opium, no doubt. More widows are herded into the village centre, each looking more dazed than the last. Some murmur to themselves, others cry softly, but no one resists. The men prod them gently with the poles. "This way, mind your step," but their smiles are tight, their eyes watchful. You notice one old woman trying to lag behind. A young man jabs her calf with his pole, and she stumbles forward, whimpering. In the centre of the village, the pyre waits. It's a pyramid of dry logs, taller than a man, coated in that sticky resin you smelled yesterday. Ghee glistens on the wood, making it shine in the morning light. Next to it stands a stone platform, worn smooth by use. A priest in a soiled white turban chants quietly, sprinkling holy water from a coconut shell. The first widow is led to the pyre. She's young, maybe in her 20s, with long black hair that hangs limply over her shoulders. Her husband died a week ago, you overheard someone say. Now she's supposed to join him in paradise. But her feet drag on the ground, and when a man tries to help her up the platform, she flinches like he's touched a burn. "Come now, sister," the priest says, his voice sickly sweet. "Your husband calls you. Don't you want to be with him again?" She doesn't answer, just stares at the pyre with glassy eyes. The men begin to place kindling around the base, then pour more ghee over the logs. The smell of butter mixes with the resin, creating a cloying scent that makes your stomach turn. That's when you see it, a clay pot being passed among the men. They dip rags into it, then stuff the rags into the widow's mouth. Gag. No, wait. They're wiping her face with the rags. Opium tincture, maybe? To make sure she stays quiet. Her head lolls back, and she makes a soft, gurgling sound. "Ready," the priest announces. The men step back, and the priest lights a torch from a nearby fire. The flame catches the ghee, and the pyre erupts in a whoosh of orange. Heat blasts across the village, making your skin prickle. But the widow doesn't move. She's still sitting there, cross-legged, her head bowed as if meditating. Then the smoke starts. Thick, black and oily, it billows up from the pyre, carried by the morning breeze. It's not the clean smoke of a campfire. This is suffocating, acrid, filled with the stench of burning resin, and here. The widow coughs once, a harsh, wet sound, then her body convulses slightly. One of the men with a bamboo pole steps forward. He hesitates for a second, then jabs the pole into the pyre, prodding the widow's shoulder. She doesn't react. He prods again, harder, and her body tilts sideways. The crowd, mostly men, with a few silent women in the back, lets out a collective sigh, as if relieved. You remember the statistic, 80% of Bengali widows died from smoke inhalation, not burns. Looking at that pyre, it's easy to believe. The flames are hot, but the smoke is everywhere, curling around the widow's face, filling her lungs. She's not screaming, not struggling, just sitting there, slowly being choked to death by the very ritual that's supposed to be her honour. Another widow is led forward as the first pyre continues to smoke. This one is older, maybe in her 50s. She's weeping openly, her hands clasped together in prayer. "Please," she begs the men, "I have grandchildren. Let me live." "Quay!" But they ignore her, half carrying her to the platform. One of them mutters, "Better to die with honour than live as a curse." You can't watch anymore. You back away from the mango tree, careful not to step on a twig, and slip into the jungle. The sound of the priest's chants fades behind you, replaced by the rustle of leaves and your own pounding heart. That's not honour. It's murder, dressed up in holy words and smoke. And if you don't get out of here, you might be next. Deep in the jungle, away from the village's smoke and chants, you stumble on a clearing that looks familiar. The ground is sunken, the dirt a different shade of black, another old pyre site, long forgotten. Unlike the fresh one in the village, this one is overgrown with weeds, but the outline of stone bricks still peeks through the grass. Something glints in the dirt. You kneel down, brushing aside moss and twigs, and find a fragment of bone. It's small, maybe a finger bone, but what catches your eye is the discoloration patches of white mixed with black, like it was exposed to intense heat. Wait, but if she'd burned completely, there wouldn't be fragments. Maybe she didn't burn as much as they thought. You start digging with a stick, careful not to break anything. The soil here is loose, almost powdery. After a few minutes, you uncover a larger piece, a human skull. its jawbone missing, eye sockets staring up at the sky. But it's not the skull that makes your breath catch. It's the bones of the forearms, still partially connected, lying across the ribcage. The wrist bones are fused together in a way that doesn't look natural. You peer closer, brushing off dirt. There, wrapped around the radius and ulna, are faint grooves in the bone, like something was tied around them tightly for a long time. Rope burns, but on the skeleton itself. The statistics flash in your mind. 19th century sati victim Anyanesha. In Jamyan, one Meshanesha, Shamyanesha. Jamyanesha. So this isn't a one-off, this was a pattern. You sit back on your heels staring at the bones. Why tie someone's wrists before a voluntary sacrifice? If she wanted to die, why restrict her movements? The old woman's words come back. Voluntary, like the monsoon is voluntary. This wasn't a choice. This was restraint, pure and simple. Next to the skull, you find a shard of clay pot, similar to the ones the men used last night. The inside is caked with a brownish residue. You scrape some off with a leaf. Could this be the opium the old woman talked about? The statistics said ashes had opium alkaloids. If you could take this to a lab, but you're in 1829, so lab tests are out of the question. Wait, but maybe contemporary scientists did this. You remember reading about 19th century forensic studies on sati sites. They found that even after burning, opium leaves chemical traces in bone and ash. The residue in this pot, if it's opium, would explain why so many widows were willing to climb onto the pyre. They were too drugged to resist. You look back at the wrist bones. The grooves are deep, like the rope was tied tightly and left on for hours, maybe days. Did they tie her up to prevent her from running away? Or to make sure she couldn't fight back when they carried her to the pyre? Either way, it's a far cry from the peaceful union with the husband that the priests chant about. A breeze rustles the leaves, making the skull's empty eye sockets seem to blink. You shiver, not from cold, but from the realization. Every blackened clearing in this jungle might hold a similar story. Every pile of ash might contain bones with hidden grooves, residue from drugged drinks. The history books say voluntary, but the bones tell a different tale. You think about the young widow on the pyre this morning, her glassy eyes and limp body. Was she tied up before? Did they drug her, then bind her wrists to keep her from struggling? The bamboo poles prodding her, were they just to encourage, or to make sure she stayed in the flames? The statistics add up now. 40% drugged, 80% dying from smoke, bones with binding marks. This wasn't a religious ritual, it was a system of control, masked by piety. Widows were either too drugged to resist, or too terrified to fight, their bodies disposed of under the guise of honour. You carefully cover the bones with leaves, not out of respect, but to hide them from the village men. If they find you here, with this evidence, you'll be next on the pyre. As you creep back toward the jungle's edge, you carry two things: the clay shard in your pocket and a new understanding. Sometimes the loudest truths are the ones buried deepest in ash and bone. The village is quiet now, probably resting after the morning's ceremonies. You need to get out, but first, let's piece this together. The opium, the ropes, the smoke, all tools to ensure compliance. And the bones? They're the silent witnesses, the evidence that history tried to burn away. But here, in this forgotten clearing, they're speaking up at last. As you stumble out of the jungle, covered in mud and clutching that clay shard, a strange sight meets your eyes. Red-coated soldiers on horseback, their uniforms bright against the green landscape. British colonialists here in 1829, the very year those statistics were recorded, 40% of voluntary sati victims drugged, 80% dying from smoke. Coincidence? Maybe, but their arrival is about to shake this village to its core. You hide behind a banyan tree as the soldiers dismount. One officer, wearing a feathered hat, consults a map while a local translator whispers in his ear. "This is the village," the translator says, pointing to the huts. "They performed sati here last month. 2 widows went up." The officer frowns, adjusting his monocle. Lord Bentinck's orders: document every case, gather evidence. William Bentinck, the Governor-General of India, had just passed the sati regulation in December 1829, banning the practice. But laws on paper are different from laws in action. You remember history class. Bentinck faced fierce opposition, even from some British officials who thought it disrespected local culture. But those statistics, 40% drugged, were part of the evidence that swayed him. The soldiers enter the village, causing a commotion. Men rush out of huts. Women hide behind doors. The priest from this morning tries to block the officer's path, shouting about sacred traditions. The officer just waves him aside. "We're here to inspect the pyre site," he says crisply, "and interview any widows who survived." You follow at a distance, curious. How will the villagers react? The old woman from yesterday is sitting on her stoop, watching with sharp eyes. When a soldier approaches her, she spits Beetlejuice and says, "What do you want, red monkey?" To watch us burn, or to stop it? The translator winces, but the officer smiles slightly. "To stop it, madam, if we can." Over the next few days, the soldiers set up camp on the village edge. They interview widows, some too terrified to speak, others like the old woman who spill out stories of opium and ropes. One young widow shows them the scars on her wrists from a failed sati attempt last year. The officer sketches them in a notebook, his face grave. You sneak a peek at his notes one night. He's written multiple accounts of forced drugging. Skeletal remains at old pyre site show ligature marks on wrists. Residue analysis by company chemist confirms opium alkaloids in ash samples. So, the British were collecting the same evidence you found, only they had the resources to analyse it. But not everyone supports the ban. A group of local landlords and priests gather in the temple, shouting about foreign interference. "The British want to destroy our culture," one priest yells. "They think we're savages." Some men nod, clutching their bamboo poles. You overhear one say, "If we can't burn the widows, they'll drain our resources. What will we do with them?" Ah, there's the real issue. Sati wasn't just about religion, it was about economics. Widows were seen as a burden, a drain on family resources. Burning them solved that problem neatly. The British called it barbaric, but the locals had their own incentives to keep it going. No wonder 40% needed drugging. Some probably did volunteer, but for reasons of poverty or fear, not faith. The officer must sense the tension. He doubles the guard, orders his men to patrol the village at night. One evening, you see him arguing with a group of elders. "The law is the law," he says firmly. "No more satis. Any man caught forcing a widow onto a pyre will be arrested." The elders grumble, but they can't argue with bayonets. A week later, a miracle happens. A widow whose husband died that morning isn't dragged to the pyre. Instead, she's left alone in her hut, guarded by a British soldier. You peek through the window. She's sitting on the floor, crying, but alive. The village is silent, unsure how to react to this new reality. But the fight isn't over. That night, you hear shouting and gunshots. The local landlords tried to sneak a widow to the pyre, but the soldiers caught them. The next day, 3 men are marched off in chains. The old woman watches them go, muttering, "About time." You leave the village soon after, heading east toward Calcutta. As you walk, you think about Bentink's ban. Was it altruism or colonial control? Historians still argue. But one thing's clear, those statistics, 40% drugged, 80% suffocated, were the nails in Sati's coffin. Without the evidence, would the British have acted? Maybe not. Sometimes numbers can be more powerful than prayers. Years later, long after you've left that Bengal village, the echoes of Sati still ripple through time. Let's fast forward to the 20th century. India's independent now, but the practice didn't vanish overnight. In 1987, a widow named Rup Kanwar was forced to burn in Rajasthan, sparking nationwide protests. The government had to pass another law, making sati illegal again because old habits die hard, especially when they're dressed up as tradition. Walk through modern Kolkata today and you'll see billboards for women's rights next to temples where priests still mutter about sati's glory. Activists with megaphones march past colonial-era buildings chanting, "No more fire, only freedom." But here's the twist. Some historians argue that sati was never as widespread as the British claimed, that they exaggerated it to justify colonial rule. Talk about a historical he said, she said. She. Visit a university library and you'll find shelves of books debating this very thing. One scholar says sati was a rare act of protest by high caste widows. Another counters that 90% of cases were forced, like those 1829 statistics showed. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but here's the key: whether 40% or 90%, any non-consensual death is a horror. Let's hop over to the United Nations. In 2007, they released a report on honour killings, which included sati-related deaths. The numbers were staggering. Over 5,000 women killed each year in South Asia under the guise of tradition. That's 5,000 too many. But even now, in 2025, you can Google recent sati cases and find articles from last month. Progress is slow when traditions are weapons. Here's a quirky fact. In some rural areas, instead of burning, widows are still forced to perform symbolic sati. They lie on the funeral pyre for a few minutes before being pulled off. It's like a dry run for death, a way to cleanse the family without actually killing her. But make no mistake, the message is the same. Your life means nothing once your husband dies. Now, let's get philosophical. Why do societies cling to harmful traditions? Maybe it's fear of change, or a need to control women's bodies. Remember that villager who said, "What will we do with them if we can't burn them?" He was right in a sad way. Without sati, they had to value widows as humans, not just burdens. That's a big cultural shift. Historians still argue about whether Bentinck's ban was a noble act or colonial overreach. Some say he saved lives, others say he destroyed a complex cultural practice. But here's a thought, maybe both are true. Maybe the British had messy motives, but that doesn't make the lives they saved any less valuable. It's like taking medicine that tastes bad but cures the disease. You might be thinking, but Ellis, what about cultural respect? Shouldn't we let societies decide their own traditions? Fair point. But here's the lie. When a tradition hurts people, especially when it's forced on women who can't say no, it's not just a tradition anymore. It's a system of oppression, and someone has to say, "This stops now." Think back to that widow with the wrist scars, to the old woman spitting Beetlejuice, to the British officer sketching ligature marks. They all played a part in unravelling this horror. Sometimes change comes from unlikely places, from a colonial soldier, from a defiant widow, from a piece of bone with a rope groove. So what's the takeaway here? First, question everything labelled sacred or traditional. Second, statistics can be powerful. Those 40% drugged, 80% suffocated numbers were game changers. Third, history is messy, but fighting for human dignity is always worth it. As you lie here, maybe with your eyes closed, imagine that Bengal village now. Maybe the pyre site is a garden, the huts have electricity, and widows run shops or teach in schools. It's a slow process, but change happens. Just like the smoke from that pyre eventually cleared, so too can the shadows of harmful traditions, if we keep shining a light on them. Alright, time to wrap up. You made it through this history lesson without being drugged or prodded with a bamboo pole. Congrats! Remember, next time someone says, "It's just tradition," ask who benefits. And who suffers? Sometimes the answers are hiding in the ashes, waiting to be found. Now, let your breath slow down. Imagine the story fading like smoke into the night. The village, the pyre, the soldiers, they're all part of a past that can't touch you now. You're safe here, in your warm bed, with the present wrapped around you like a soft blanket. Think of the stars above that Bengal village, the same stars that shine over you tonight. They've seen so much history, so much pain and hope, that they still twinkle gently, never rushing. Like them, take your time to drift off. No need to hurry, sleep will come when it's ready. Feel your body growing heavier, each muscle relaxing a little more. The words of the story are like lullabies now, soft and soothing. Let them carry you down, down into the quiet place where dreams begin. There's no fear here, no opium smoke, just peace. So rest easy, friend. The past is gone, the present is calm, and the future is a blank page. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let sleep weave its magic. Good night and sweet dreams.